The next one on this list is, I'm throwing books. Hold on. Hi everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with some disappointments and surprises from this year. So I usually do this in two separate videos, but today I thought we would combine them into the same video, which is funny because for the first time this year I have pretty long lists for both. I have 10 disappointments and 10 surprises, and I usually have a hard time finding disappointments and then also differentiating surprises from books that I just really loved. And this year I feel like I had no problem finding disappointments. I was very, I guess, brutal in my opinions of books. I don't know, but I will separate this or chapter this video if you're curious about one or the other and you don't really care about like the disappointments but you want to know about the surprises and vice versa. So feel free to skip ahead to a section if you want to, but otherwise let's dive into the disappointments first. Get the negative out of the way, you know? Okay, the first one, I mean, there's no particular order, this is how I thought of them. So the first one is The Bay of Sighs by Nora Roberts, which is the second book in the Guardians trilogy. The first one in the series was Stars of Fortune, which I really, really enjoyed. I think I read it at the end of last year and loved it and thought it was fantastic and wanted to continue. So I ended up doing one of those Simplify My series, a series that I started here on this channel about this trilogy. And this was the second one, and based on the main characters in this world, it's basically like 6 people who are total strangers in the first book, but they all come together because they're in search of these 3 stars or rocks that have some mythology surrounding them. It's fantastical. They all have a secret as to why they're searching for these stars, etc. And each series or each book in the series follows a different couple within this group of 6. So this is the second one, and based on the people that I knew were pairing up, I was super excited about this one. I was more excited about this one than the third one as far as the couple goes, because I felt like it made sense, and I felt like the third couple was just kind of like the one that was left over, so they felt like they needed to be together. Whereas when I read them, I had the reverse reaction, and like this one was just kind of okay. Like, I don't know if it was just the first one was my very first Nora Roberts book I'd ever read, and so I was really invested in that one, so it was so good that like the second one wasn't as good because I was expecting that same level and it was a different level. I don't know, I just put a lot of hype on this book and I ended up loving the third one more. I still think the first one is my favorite in the series, and I still really enjoyed it. I still feel like I gave this one like 3 or 4 stars, but like as far as what I expected going in, I thought this was going to be like amazing. Was so excited about this couple, and it just kind of like fell flat for me. The next one is actually a graphic novel, which I think is surprising because I feel like I don't read a lot of graphic novels, but that is the first volume of Rat Queens, and this one is Sass and Sorcery, and it's by Curtis J. Wybe and Rock Upchurch. I'm sure I said that wrong. I read this near the beginning of the year. I think I read this for one of my BookTube Made Me series that I was doing, and I'm pretty sure it's from Becca in the Books, because she really enjoyed this series, and I don't know what I was expecting going in, but like it is way more gruesome than I thought it was going to be, and I didn't quite get where we were going with this. Also, the main characters drove me nuts. I could not stand some of the main characters. I have the second volume as well. I ended up picking that one up when I picked up the first one. So I am going to continue, and then I think the rest are on my Hoopla app. So I am planning on continuing because I feel like I remember it ending very dramatically, and I wanted to know the mystery elements of this, but like the main characters themselves drove me nuts. And so because of that, I think I expected this to be this really cool like group of 4 like badass women who were like taking on some really like big things, and it turned into, yes, a mystery, but also like I could not stand the main character and I just wanted it to end. The next one is My Killer Vacation by Tessa Bailey, which is my very first Tessa Bailey book, and I'd heard such amazing things about this writer. I'd heard that she was one of the best like smutty book writers, smutty romances. This one was like a murder mystery that takes place in Cape Cod between like it's our main character who rents like a house or a condo, and she finds the owner dead, and so this bounty hunter is hired to figure out what's going on, and so she is very into murder mystery podcasts and tries to get involved with the mystery with him as he's trying to solve some stuff, and he doesn't want her there and drives him nuts. And so it's like the two of them. It's super short, which is what I think it suffered for me, because the characters just like didn't work. Like their romance was like, it was super smutty, and the smutty scenes were great if that's what you want, and that's the point of this book for you as the reader. But like as far as a mystery goes, it was just kind of like put on the back burner, and their romance was very, very rushed, which happens in shorter books, which is why I think this one probably needed to be longer, maybe twice as long. It's just kind of like, I don't know, like I went into it with such high expectations, and I thought it would be perfect for like the summer, which it was, because it did have those summer beachy vibes, but I don't know, it just didn't work. It just didn't work for me. The next one is one that I don't own anymore, or it's downstairs in the book of boxes, or the box of books that I need to take to the book warehouse near us, but that is Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. This is the first in her like Hades and Persephone series, which is one that was super, super, super hyped online, especially on Book Talk. I feel like everyone loved this book, raved about this book, talked about the smuttiness of this book, and I went in expecting a lot of things from this. It was a Hades and Persephone retelling, which is one of my favorite things to read. I know that's really, really popular as far as like mythology retellings go, but it's perfect hate to love kind of situation, and I do love that, and I do love seeing all of the different versions of the Hades and Persephone story that we get. So I was really interested to see what this one was about, especially because there was so much hype around it, and I ended up giving this one, I think, a 3-star, and deciding to DNF the series because I felt like I got enough from the first one. I liked the new twist the author gave to the Persephone story and the Hades story. It just had, like, as far as what made them, I feel like there was some new twists in here that were really, really interesting, and I liked that element of it, but like the smut was so non-existent. I mean, that's not true. They did have a lot of smutty scenes, but it was like, it was almost like the author pressed fast forward on them, and they just kind of felt very, very rushed. It just felt very surface level as far as romances go, and I felt like there was much better Hades and Persephone retellings, let alone romances out there. So I think I expected too much from this going in, and it just didn't work for me. Next one on this list is Heart of the Raven Prince, by Titonia Odette. It's part of her Entangled with Fae series. This is specifically a Cinderella retelling. This one I read for my very first Simplify My series. I did the rest of the books that were out at the time, and they were all companions, so they weren't like the same series. I mean, it was set in the same world, but they're all companions. They all follow different people. And they're all fairy tale retellings in some way, and this was the first one I had read, and I think I was getting back into her writing. I did enjoy the other two much better, especially the fourth one in the series, because this is the second one. So the fourth one was my favorite in the series, and I don't know why this one didn't work for me as much, because I do love a good, Cinderella retelling. Cinderella was my favorite princess when I was like a little girl, so I definitely have a soft spot in my heart for like the story of Cinderella, but for some reason, I don't know what it was, it just felt very disconnected as far as the romance goes. Like as a reader, I felt like it was very, very disconnected, and there wasn't like the romance just felt rushed, and at the same time surface level, which I guess is a word that I'm using a lot in this video. So yeah, this one just kind of, I don't know if it just didn't work, if it just didn't have the tropes that I wanted, or I was just getting back used to her writing again, or I don't know what it was, but this one specifically didn't really work, and so I think that hurt the story as a whole. The next one is Mr. Perfect on Paper by Jean Meltzer. This is maybe her debut, I'm not entirely sure, but this is the author who wrote The Matzo Ball, which I read last Christmas and fell head over heels in love with. It was my favorite book, I think, of December. It was definitely like one of my favorites. I'm not sure if it made it onto my favorites of the year, but it should have. And I just loved her writing so much. So I was really excited to see what other things she had written. But this one just, I don't know what it was, but I think I was expecting the same vibes as what the Matzo Ball gave me, and this one fell flat compared to that. So I definitely went into this one with way too high of an expectation, especially for a debut novel, because I think her writing, obviously, like your writing as a whole changes as an author when you go from a debut to other things. And so this one, while cute, and I really liked the story of it, and it was still good. Like, I think I still gave it 4 stars. I think I wanted it to give me the exact same feelings and those fuzzy vibes that I got when I read The Matzo Ball, and this just didn't deliver the same. And I think that's why this one I would consider a disappointment. The next one I don't own either because it's the, I read it at the very beginning of the year, and it is a bind-up. At least I had the bind-up, and that is Stupid Love Comedy, which is a bind-up of 3 different volumes. And I read the first one last year sometime. Loved it. Thought it was amazing. Couldn't wait to continue. Read the second and third volume at the beginning of this year, and they just fell so flat for me. The first one was really good about getting me interested in the story, which is very, very important. And the second two just did not deliver the same experience. It didn't deliver the same romance. It felt like the author was trying to write the story. I mean, it's about a main character who is a manga writer and artist herself. So, like, you know, there's a lot of realness, and I feel like we do get a lot of interesting looks at the world of mangas when it comes to publishing and writing them. But as far as like the romance element, which is what this is marketed as, that was very backburner. It was like the author was planning on writing a much longer story, and then all of a sudden realized she wasn't going to get that. And so she had to like wrap it up really, really quickly, and it felt super rushed. It felt like, I mean, seriously, like the romance happened in the last like 2 pages of this manga. And so I don't know, it just felt rushed. And because the first one was so good, I expected so much from these 2, and they just did not deliver. The next one is 10 Rules for Marrying a Duke, and this is by Michelle McLean. This one was a disappointment because, I mean, it was fine. It was like a decent historical romance. It's kind of what you expect when you hear like your stereotypical historical romances. It was fluffy. It was this main characters who created a deal and ended up like falling for each other. And that's great and all, but this author had written one of my favorite books from the year before, which was, I'm forgetting the name, Hitched to a Gunslinger, which was my first foray into like Western that I enjoyed. And so I really want to read this author's backlogged books because I enjoyed that series so much. There's only 2 in that series, and I loved it so much. And so this was one of the first ones that I tried. I actually ended up reading this with my friend Taylor, and we both were like, this is not up to the same standards. So I don't know if it was because it was such an early book in this writer's career, or it was a different setting and we enjoy her, you know, Westerns more, because she has written quite a few historical Regency style, Victorian style romances. And so I definitely want to give the other books that she has written a try because they do sound interesting. I just think that this one suffered from us hyping it up way too much because the other book that we had read by her was so good, and this is just a different world that we weren't expecting, but also being maybe a newer book, whereas Hitched to a Gunslinger is her most recent books. And so like that series is her most recent. So I think there's a couple reasons this suffered, but it definitely was like, I think the biggest issue was the hype that we put on it. The next one is also actually the last 2 that are disappointments are also historical romances of some way. And this one is The Chief, and that's by Monica McCarty. It's the first in the Highland Guard series. This one ended up getting 3 stars because I also read this with my friend Taylor. We started this series at the beginning of the year and we're hoping to finish it by the end of the year, but life got in the way. We both hit slumps throughout the year. Craziness ensued. So I think we're about halfway through at this point. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember the last book that I ended up reading. So I would love to get back to this at some point once we're both like calmed down in our respective slumps. But this was the first step into this series, and neither of us knew what we were expecting. And it was fine. Like, it was fine. And I think the problem why it was a disappointment, this is a very highly loved series. Like, a lot of people really, really enjoy it. If you look at Goodreads, the average review is relatively high. And so we went into this one expecting it to be really, really good, and it just was not the same writing. Once we understood the first book and this author's writing, I think the rest of the series got better for us. But this book, because it's set in like the Highland, Scotland time period area, it is brutal. And so like we have definitely read Highland romances before where they kind of sugarcoat the world a little bit, and they did not do that in this book. They did not steer clear of having like sexual assault scenes right away, and having our main character not be super nice to our main female character, just because of the time period. Men were thought very differently than women and things like that. And so also it takes place during wartime, and so there's a lot of brutality when it comes to that. So the author was trying to build a world in the first book, and also did not steer clear from some of the more brutal elements of that world, which is totally fine. It's just not what we expected going in. And I think that's why we were very like startled by this book, and why it didn't sit right with us, because we weren't sure what we were expecting going in. Now, spoiler, one of the books in the series made it onto my most surprising books of the list, and like one of my favorites. And so it definitely turned around, but this one being the first, I think suffered because it was the first and we weren't sure what to expect. I'm saying we because I know that she and I have very, very similar opinions about this. On the reverse of that, this one I think suffered because it was the last book I read in a series, even though it's the first in a series. Secrets of a Summer Night by Lisa Kleypas, which is the first in the Wallflower series. This is a series that follows 4 women and their respective romances, and so this one just happened to be the first one where they met and became friends, and each book is one of the girls' romances. So yes, I read them out of order in the sense of like I knew who she was going to end up with because of the second and third book and like so on. But at the same time, you go into a book like this knowing how it's going to end. So I was interested to see this one because I wanted to see how they became friends. I was very interested in this group of 4 women who had become so close, and I'd seen how close they had become by the other books, and so I wanted to see how it started. So that was really great, but it also suffered because I'm not entirely sure why, but there are elements of this book that was rewritten. I had the audiobook going in my ear, and I also was following along, and like there's a prologue in here that's completely taken out of the audiobook. There are scenes that are completely taken out of the book, which this has happened with other books in the series. I'm thinking of the second one specifically because there were some dubious moments that she definitely rewrote those scenes to make them better. But when it came to this book, the scenes that were taken out of the book, I still read them because I remember going back and being like pausing my audiobook and reading the sections that were not in the audiobook. I couldn't find anything specifically in those scenes that there was a reason they were removed. It was just kind of like rewritten for the sake of being rewritten, and it was very, very confusing experience. So I think this book suffered from my experience reading it because I was so like, what is happening? I don't understand. Now we're in the section where we talk about the books that surprised me. So I hopefully won't talk too much about these because these are going to be very, very repetitive. It's my feelings about them. It's going to be gush fest is what I'm saying. So the first book on this list is one that I read in October, and that is King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. And this one surprised me because for a couple of reasons. One, it's the first in a series, and it's a first in a series about vampires. I've talked about this before. I don't particularly love stories about vampires because of the whole blood thing. I don't do well with blood and gore in books. And so I forced myself to read a bunch of vampire books this year. And it turned out pretty well, actually. But this one is one that really surprised me because there's that, and I shouldn't have liked it because of that. I should have been super, super squeamish, and there wasn't a lot of moments that made me squeamish in this book, which was great. But second, this is an author who wrote the other book that I talked about in The Disappointments, which was A Touch of Darkness. And so I didn't know if this was going to be the same experience. If I was like, is it going to be that series just didn't work for me, or is it going to be this author doesn't work for me? And it turns out I think it was just that series because this one is amazing. I fell head over heels. I got hooked on our characters almost immediately. Like from the first or second page, I was already invested in our main female lead as a character. And then when we met our characters together, like there was just a lot of elements that worked. So it surprised me because there was a lot of moments in here and a lot of things that were against this book based on my own personal reading tastes. And it worked out great. Kind of in the same vein, I also have It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey, which took me heart and soul. When I tell you I was in kind of a slump, and this took me out of that, and all I wanted to do was read contemporary romances because of this book. But because I'd read the other book by Tessa Bailey, the one I talked about earlier that I'm already blanking on, My Killer Vacation, I didn't know what to expect going into this one. So I think I had low expectations, and I think this one was fantastic because it's much longer. This author was able to flesh out a story more. There was more to work with. We had some kind of like polar opposite main characters. Her writing is just better in longer formats, I personally think. So this had a couple of ticks against it because of the author and my experience with this author, but it worked because of it was longer and just a couple of other things. So amazing, loved it. The next one was one that was surprising because I didn't expect anything from it going in, and that is Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie Maniscalco, which is funny because this is now one of my favorite series of all time. So this book is one that I picked up because it was actually from Frolic Fiction's Patreon buddy read one month. I can't remember which one it was. Like somewhere in the summer, we ended up picking this one up, and I had it on my shelves, and I did want to read it. I wanted to give it a chance. I'd heard it's not a Hades and Persephone retelling by any stretch of the imagination, but if you like the vibes of like Hades and Persephone books, I was told that you would enjoy this. So I went into it not expecting a lot. It was YA, which I've been kind of steering clear from, but mostly in the contemporary vein. So I was still willing to give this a chance, but I didn't really expect anything of it. Honestly, I kind of expected to kind of enjoy it and then unhaul it is really what I was thinking. But I was genuinely surprised by how much the mystery in this book completely took over my opinions. Like, I was obsessed with this book from like 25% of the way through. I feel like I had to get a little bit into it, but once I was into it, like, I was into the story. And as you guys know, I read the rest of the series and completely loved it. So this one, I don't know why I didn't expect anything from it, but I didn't expect anything like magical. I thought it was just gonna be like another YA fantasy that I enjoyed and would move on. And it wasn't. It was so much more than that. And these characters were so good. And it just continued. And like the character of Wrath is one of my favorite male like love interests or male main characters to read about. Like, he is the definition of morally gray. And I just loved reading about him. So yeah, it was good. I didn't expect anything from this book, and it was so good. The next one, kind of similar to that one, so I didn't expect a whole lot from it, was The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle Jensen. So this one was, I read it for one of the Booktube Made Me series for Becca. Actually, I'm going to talk about her again in the future. But for that video, I read a couple of things, including The Bridge Kingdom, because I'd heard things about that if you liked like the fantasy romance vibe, you would enjoy that one. And I was kind of experimenting with fantasy romance to see if it was for me. It was definitely like, took over my soul. Like, I don't know why it worked so well. I don't know why the world worked, because like, I'm someone who, when I read fantasy books, I read them for the plot, and then if I read them a second time, that's when I pick up more on the world building and things like that. Like, world building is not something that clicks with me right away. So the fact that this world clicked so quickly was amazing, and I think I just really enjoyed their romance as a whole, to the point that like when it ended on the first book, I was like, excuse me, I need more, and I immediately picked up the second one. Now, they are short books, like I have the audiobooks, but they are relatively short as far as like fantasy books go. So if you want something fun and like very kind of quick, this is definitely for you. But it's a good tester, I think, of if fantasy romance is for you, because it does have a lot of those fantastical vibes. It does have a lot of those like war vibes, which again shouldn't work for me because I don't like books set around and during war, but it did. I don't actually have a reason why this book worked, but it was so surprising to me that I loved it as much as I did. And another book from the video that I did for Becca, which is kind of funny, is The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. This one is one of those like iffy books where I'm not surprised that I liked it, but I'm surprised by how much I liked it. So I'd heard, now, hold on, back up. I put this in that video because I'd heard of it from Becca, because she also loves The Hating Game, which is such a good book. I really enjoyed that book. But there was a couple of things hating game wise, like in The Hating Game, that like didn't sit right with me when it came to our main characters at work. There's just a couple things that I was like, I'm not sure I like that. This book had been compared to, if you liked The Hating Game and you liked the dynamic between those characters, you would enjoy this book. And I loved it. The things that our main characters did in this book was a couple of like, especially when it came to the work situation, was what I wanted from the Hating Game. So like, while I still love the Hating Game and it still got 5 stars and I still will always love that book, there's just a couple of things that just never sat completely right with me, and this book kind of like fixed those, I guess, in my brain. So I don't know, like I'm not sure what I was expecting. I was expecting to enjoy it, but I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much. The next couple are going to be from a video that I did way at the beginning of the year about books that I wish I had read the year before. And I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting a whole lot from this book, and I loved it. And that is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I had picked up, or this came in a Fairy Loot box, like not last year, the year before, whenever it came out, recently-ish. And I had even ordered the sequel to it, and I hadn't read it yet. So I was really hoping that I was going to enjoy it. But again, I kind of went in thinking it was just going to be like a fluffy YA fantasy that I would enjoy my time while I was actively reading it, but like it wasn't going to, you know, stick out in my brain too much. I don't know why, but our main character, I love her, and I became so obsessed with the main 2 characters, Evangeline and Jax in this series. They were just perfect, and then they continued being perfect in the second one, and I really want to get to the third one soon, but like I don't know why it took me heart and soul, but it did, and I became utterly obsessed with this book. I really enjoyed the world that was created. I've never read anything by this author before, but I just loved this. Again, I don't know why I didn't expect a lot from it, because there was nothing wrong with the synopsis or anything about this book. I just like went in with lower expectations for some reason and blew my mind. All right, the next one is also a sequel and also something I read in that video, and that is Our Violent Ends by Chloe Gong. And the reason that this is a surprise is because the first one was just kind of okay. I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't my favorite book. It's a like Romeo and Juliet retelling set in Shanghai. It's in the 20s. It's like Roaring 20s time. It's a little fantastical. This one got more fantastical, and it ended on a huge cliffhanger. So I was like, ooh, I want to continue because it's only a duology and I kind of want to see where our characters go, but I was hemming and hawing because, again, I gave the first book, I think, 3 stars, so I wasn't 100% sold on it. And then I just kind of was like, all right, fine, you know what? Read it. I got it from my library, I think, or Scribd or something, and I read it. And within, like, I would say maybe somewhere between a fourth to a third of this book, I was heavily invested in these characters. I was heavily invested in the world again, and I don't know why the second one worked and the first one didn't. I think now that I've like emotionally connected to these characters, I should reread the first one and see if I have different opinions on it, but like for some reason this second book was so much better than the first one. And I don't know if it's because the romance, like what the romance was doing in this book, or if it was just because I already like had the first book to understand our characters, and this book I got like, I mean, I don't know, I have no explanation as to why this one worked and the first one didn't, but I went in with very low expectations because of the first book, and it just blew me out of the water. It got 5 stars. I loved this. It was so good. The next one is a manga that I picked up, and that is Cutie and the Beast Volume 1. And this one is by Yuhi Azumi. This one is one of the ones that I picked up when I was just kind of doing like a bunch of like buying first volumes to see if I liked manga and like what types of manga that I like. I picked this one up. I can't remember why. Maybe it was for a readathon. Maybe it was for my normal TBR. There was a reason I picked it up, but it just, I wasn't expecting a whole lot from it because it has to do with boxing, and I couldn't care less about boxing or MMA or any kind of like that, like fighting and stuff like that. That does not interest me. It is sportsy, which is again also not my favorite, so it had a couple of ticks against it, and I wasn't 100% sure how I was going to feel, but I ended up really enjoying it. There's definitely some things that I am confused by because there's a pretty big age gap between our 2 main characters, but it is referenced in the books. Like, it is not just mentioned and then moved on. It's like our main characters talk about it. It's definitely an issue that they are trying to work through. But I also just really enjoyed these characters. I thought they were really fun to read about. I'm super excited to continue. I really want the other 2. I feel like there's only 3 volumes out, but I might be totally wrong about that. But I'm very invested in this couple, and I kind of feel like I need to reread it because it's been a hot second, but I definitely enjoyed this, and just how sweet our like main male character was, and just, I don't know why I went in not expecting a whole lot, but I ended up giving this, I think, like 5 stars. Like, I loved this story. The next one is Texas Destiny, which is the very first, is this the very first book in the Texas series? I think it is. And this is by Lorraine Heath, and this was our first step into her world. I was buddy reading, again, one of the buddy reads that unfortunately fell through the wayside when the slumps hit. So we have kind of fallen off on that, but I hope we can pick it back up. But we're starting Lorraine Heath. This was the friends that I did the Tissa Dare buddy reads with, and so we decided to pick a different historical romance author and dive into her stuff. And so she wrote both like Victorian Regency style stories as well as Westerns. And so it just so happened that her very first book was a Western. So I went in not expecting a lot because again, Western. I'm still a little iffy when it comes to Western because I'm not 100% sure that my experience with Hitched to a Gunslinger was a like one-off that author, or if it was I'm starting to appreciate Westerns. So I didn't know what to expect going to this one. Again, it's a debut, so I expected even less from it. And it was amazing. Like, I was so invested in these characters from the get-go. This is the book that when people make fun of historical romance books, this is the book you point to and say, this one's amazing, because the character development in this book was phenomenal. And this series as a whole, but like the first one in the series is my favorite. I like this couple much more than the other two. It's a scarred hero who is just like, you want to hold him, and it's not necessarily in the like, you know, stereotypical, there's some cliches in this book. It's not like that. It's like, this was researched well, and everything is, you know, like our main characters, it makes sense what they're doing, and all of their reactions are 100% logical, and it's exactly what you would expect if you were in a situation like this. I don't know how to explain it. It's just, she really made these characters so real from the get-go, and I was invested in them as people from chapter 1. And the last book that is kind of on my surprises list, if you will, is The Ranger by Mona McCarty, which is the third in the Highland Guard series. Like I mentioned, the chief was on a disappointment, but this one was on the surprises because we had just finished, like I said, this is the third book, so we had just finished 2 books, where the first one, we were just getting used to the world and it was okay. And the second one was better because we were used to the world, but I wasn't sold on the romance. It was just kind of fine. This one is still to this day my favorite in the series. I loved it. And it's one of those like, they used to have a thing, he will always love her, but he knows he's wrong for her kind of situation. So he kind of forces himself to not be around her. And she's like, no, we're not doing that. I'm going to force you to be around me. And it's, you know, you see him struggle with his emotions. And there's something about that was just amazing to read. And I loved these characters. And he was so sweet, yet he was strong when he needed to be. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but like, maybe because the other two were just meh, this one was amazing, and it surprised me so much because I went into it not expecting a whole lot compared to like other series, again because the first 2 were just kind of okay. Amazing, absolutely amazing. And that's it. That is a look at the books that both disappointed and surprised me this year. It's a little bit of a longer video, I do apologize, but I hope that you guys enjoyed. Please let me know all of your thoughts if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in today's video, or if you have some disappointments and surprises from this year that you would like to share. I would love to know all of your bookish thoughts down below. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there as well as other fun bookish links, so remember to check all that out, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!